Well, welcome everyone to our second webinar in the 2017 series. This afternoon we're going to be looking at Ontario Power Generation's nuclear waste burial plan, yet again. Round 5 by the phases in the Canadian Environmental Assessment review process, and I guess ball 4 in a strikeout game for Ontario Power Generation. So we are going to be sharing the presentation this afternoon with Jill Taylor from SOS Great Lakes and John Jackson from the Citizens Network on Waste Management, and myself, Bernane, from Northwatch. What we want to do is a very quick run through of where we're at, what the key issues are, and how to engage now in the review process at this current stage, which is a review of a request for additional information that the Minister put to Ontario Power Generation in February of last year. And we are responding to a March 6th deadline for public comments. So we're going to do a quick overview and then have some time for comments, discussions, and then finish off talking about next steps in this process. So there is a lot of So Ontario Power Generation, the description according to Ontario Power Generation, it's a deep geologic repository disposal facility to manage low-level and intermediate-level waste, and the waste would consist of industrial items. OPG likes to lowball both in terms of volume and hazard of these materials. The facility would be located at the Bruce Nuclear Generating Station. So we've seen lots of different images over the years of this project, of this facility. The one we see the most from Ontario Power Generation is a very benign looking set of lines and rods deep underground. And we often see an overshot of a number of buildings quite separated in most of the images from that Ontario Power Generation provides from something that is a key concern for, I think, all of us, and that is its close proximity to Lake Huron. The facility is, and I've been frustrated by the images that OPG provides and how none of these images actually really convey the depth, the proximity, the physical context of the project. So we've got 3 images here that I've taken and blended together in a very approximate non-graphic artist kind of effort. But we see the 3 sources here. On your left, you have the borehole, a mapping of the borehole an image of the boreholes that OPG drilled. They limited 6 boreholes to define the geology of the proposed site for the deep geologic repository. And you see a faint shadow of a yellow sort of octagonous shade, which is depicted in the middle. That's the base case layout for the underground footprint of the deep geologic repository. On the right-hand side, you see a green line that is what OPG calls the project area. And what I then did is I took those images and I just transposed them onto a Google shot of the actual site. And you see the very close proximity. The red line in the center, that's the underground footprint. The green line is the project boundary. Surrounding that, of course, is Bruce Nuclear Generating Station and the reactors. The Western Waste Management Facility is actually overprinted by the Deep Geologic Repository. And then I took that and I went to claim maps, which allows really easy and accurate measuring. So you see the image on the left, another image of the underground repository footprint, but it provided more visual indicators, visual markers that I could then match up with claim map. And you see the point, the red point is the DGR shaft, which our technical experts in phase 2 and 3 of this review identified as the first point of likely release from the deep geologic repository. And we measured that then, use a very simple measurement from claim maps, and see that that shaft is approximately 899 meters from McPherson Bay, going in one angle, 965 meters going in the other. And it frustrates me that after 13 years of a review process, we have to hand draw using a variety of sources to even get a clear depiction of the proximity of the most likely first release point to Lake Huron. So some of the key issues, and this is a short list of the key issues: nuclear waste burial in limestone is unprecedented. There is, to our knowledge, no other project that is even considering a deep geologic repository in limestone as the geology. There's a veritable repository of technical and scientific uncertainties related to deep geologic repositories as a class, as a group. Specific to this project, because we have had some time to look at some of the technical issues, there's a whole list of really very significant unknowns related to things like pressures at repository depth, unknown relationship and extent and effect of gas generation at depth, and all those are about pressures that would move the radionuclides from repository at depth out to surface, either through gas, water, air, to either the lake or to the environment. Strong local and regional opposition. OPG has announced that it will double the volume after approval. It'll seek a license amendment to add the waste from decommissioning, which will double the volume but more than double the radiological burden. And it is, of course, immediately adjacent to Lake Huron. And OPG experts in phase 3 of the hearing stated that Lake Huron will provide dilution. So timeline, we've been at this for a while. 2002, Kincardine and Ontario Power Generation got together, signed a memorandum of understanding to begin this process. Kincardine signed a host agreement with a payment schedule in 2004. The DGR was referred to federal review in 2006. Environmental impact statement filed in 2011. Joint review panel appointed in 2012. I think somebody has their phone and their speaker on because we're getting feedback. Maybe, John, I'm going to mute you. No, I don't know. I'm not sure how to deal with that, but somebody's got phone and speaker on, mic and speaker on. So 33 days of hearing in 2013 and 2014. Review panel recommended approval, downloading of all the key outstanding technical issues to CNSC staff in 2015. The minister was to issue a decision statement in 2015, extended that deadline, and in February 2016, issued a request for additional information to Ontario Power Generation. And OPG filed that report December 28th, posted January 3rd. So in February 2016, the minister requested additional information from OPG in 3 areas. Her request did not cover all of the serious outstanding issues, the failures of OPG's original submission, but they did touch on some key areas. So the first request was for OPG study additional alternate locations, actual locations, and to provide criteria for technical and economic feasibility in assessing those locations. Also to do cumulative effects, environmental effects analysis of the project, considering that the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is majority Ontario Power Generation, is also investigating locations in the region, in the immediate region, for a deep geologic repository for irradiated fuel, high-level nuclear waste. And then an updated list of mitigation committees. So on December 28th, posted to the registry on January 3rd, OPG filed a number of studies. 4 studies related to alternate location, 2 studies related to cumulative effects, and 1 related to mitigation measures. And the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, if people could please mute their microphones, that would assist their sound quality. And the estimated timeline was released. February 18th was the minister's request back in 2016. We have a public comment period, originally February 17th, now moved to March 6th. And the agency, we submit public comments. The agency will prepare a draft report. Then they'll release that draft report with potential conditions for a 30-day comment period. Then they'll finalize their report and submit a decision package to the minister in the fall of 2017. So with that, I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to make Jill, I'm going to unmute her audio, and I'm going to make Jill the host. Do I want to change the host to Jill Taylor? Yes, I do.
I am the host now. Okay. Can you see my screen?
No, you have to share your screen now.
I have to share screen. Okay, let's see what happens. Tell me when you can see it.
I can see it.
Can you see it?
I can see it.
Can you see the full screen?
We can't see your slides, Jill.
Okay.
So we're just seeing your face.
All right. Well, so can you see it now?
Ah, there we go.
And you can see my presentation?
Yep.
Oh, that's great. Okay. That's great. So I'll start now, and if anything messes up, just tell me because I'm a novice at this. So thanks very much, Bernane. And I have quite a few slides. As Bernane said, the mine of information on this subject is boundless. And so I am going to run through my slides, but I won't necessarily stop and read each one. My subject is alternate locations, but I'm also going to speak at the end to social license and to cost as well. And if you can't hear me, you'll tell Bernane and I will speak more clearly. So SOS Great Lakes, which was formed in 2012, has spent the last 5 years, we've had our anniversary now, and by the way, happy Valentine's Day. We've celebrated our anniversary of opposing the DGR1 and DGR2. We have JR'd in 2015 the JRP report, and we have a suit pending with the Ministry of to the Attorney General Federal, OPG and CNSC, which is still which is still active. If you would go to our website, I have it indicated here, it's sosgreatlakes.org. We have new videos and constantly are putting information up to advocate for the cause that I know everyone is very interested in. So next slide. There we go. Our message to the minister from SOS Great Lakes, both when it was the Conservative minister and then it was the Liberal minister, has been that the OPG plan should be rejected outright right now, that OPG has, and now currently, that the OPG has not answered the minister's questions and has been irresponsible and devious. And we're telling the minister that she continues to ignore the other points of dispute that we have raised as a group in letters to her that have to do with infractions of the CEAA. And we have asked her why she's not asking OPG these questions as well. On the alternative locations, or we should actually call them specific actual locations, the minister asked OPG in her letter of February 18th to have them identify specific actual locations that would meet OPG's criteria for technical and economic feasibility. This is the paragraph that refers to, from her February 18th letter that refers to that request. She also asked them to detail not only the actual locations, but to detail the thresholds that they were using and what they considered to be technically and economically feasible in terms of criteria. Also, the incremental cost and risk for each option. The JRP and the minister have asked OPG to meet the SIA criteria over 5 times. They've asked for the same information on comparative alternates, and what OPG has come back with is 2 geologic regions. They still have not answered the question. Not only have they not answered the question, but the minister specifically asked them to provide only new information, and if they provided information from the EIS, that they were to very carefully footnote that. They provided no information, basically, and parroted the EIS, and their response has been completely inadequate and should continue to be looked at as something that should be rejected immediately. Going back in history a bit, the CEAA of 2012 made it a central pillar that the proponent was to consider alternate means of carrying out a designated project. For OPG, in their report and also in the various iterations of their discussion, OPG has said that alternative needs for them is linked to a requirement of alternative location.
Sorry.
So one of the things that OPG said in the 2011 EIS was that the reason that they weren't dealing with alternate sites was because they didn't have to, because they had made a bargain with municipality of Kincardine that got them out of the requirement of SIA. They said that that Kincardine was a willing host, that the land was available, and it was suitable for all the reasons that it needed to be suitable. SILA, among others, identified the error of OPG in making those statements, and pointed to the fact that all research indicated that the comparison of alternate sites would be appropriate in this particular case. This became a constant refrain during the hearings of 2013 and 2014, and in fact was one of the reasons that OPG had to come back to the table in 2014 to address alternative sites, which they never did. In 2013, OPG hired what they called the independent expert group to buy into their view on the alternate locations. And the IEG basically looked at the Bruce site and a hypothetical granitic site, generic, for the handling of waste. They produced a report that indicated in the end that additional handling and transportation between the Bruce nuclear site and an alternate granitic site would cause substantial cost as well as environmental degradation because of the carbon footprint of the travel, that the longer distances would increase risk of accident, and there was additional, although a low risk of radiological exposure. This is 2013. The report that we see in 2016 basically says absolutely nothing different and uses the same words that were used by IEG and OPG, and you will see later the JRP, in giving reason for no alternative site being considered. The JRP was in fact critical of the IEG report in their 2015 report. That's the May 2015 agreeing to go ahead with the conditional agreement with OPG. And they were critical of the IEG report because IEG had, in buying into OPG's logic, had discounted the suitability of a granitic site, even though there was substantial information on granitic and crystalline resources available because of the URL that was it had been in place for over 20 years in Pinawa, Manitoba. So not only did the JRP launch into OPG and the IEG about their conclusions, but the CNSC also criticized OPG for downplaying the potential for granitic and crystalline locations to be a suitable repository location. But as we know, in 2015, the JRP panel backed down and forgot everything that they had said in the previous 1,000 pages and said that they were satisfied in the end that OPG had studied alternate sites and that they thought the Bruce was the best possible site. So we come to December 2016 to the report made to the minister by OPG. And as I've said in a few moments ago, the OPG report repeats much of what is in the EIS with no new information. They reused the info on the alternative sites that they had before, and but they did a couple of things. First of all, they hired something called the IEP, which is International Expert Panel, to replace their failed IEG, which was the independent expert group, because they had been critiqued so heavily. And they also created a new poll of Ontarians to replace the flawed polls that had been criticized during the hearings that they had taken, that OPG had initiated from 2005 through 2010. So we get to the study of alternate locations. As we all know now, shockingly, OPG adopted an approach where they didn't identify locations. They said that it was adequate to identify two regions, one a sedimentary rock formation region and a granitic rock formation, which they called crystalline in the Canadian Shield. They developed economic and technical feasibility criteria that they thought applied to these whole giant areas of Ontario. And they did, however, identify pinpoints of geographic location, which they said defined the borders of these regions in a very confused response to the requirement for alternate locations. This was kind of something that confused everyone because they had a chart of these pinpoint locations. Some of the pinpoints were in Manitoba, some were in the States, some were in the middle of lakes. And everyone got very confused to the point where in a fantastic article in the Toronto Star by Jennifer Wells, she adopted the title for the OPG report, Could You Narrow That Down More Narrowly? She had done the research which cited that Larry Ryden's gas station would not be a very good location for the DGR, nor would a Rosedale residence. So they were completely, their report was very flawed in many ways, but also laughable. That was able to be isolated very quickly, but we will move on from that. The way that they identified the two regions, sedimentary and crystalline, was that they said that they identified key characteristics that you would be able to derive from a grade 11 geography book, and said that the sedimentary alternate locations, which were somewhere in the Great Lakes Basin in southern Ontario and southwestern Ontario, would have various characteristics which they borrowed from their their Kincardine report. And then they went on to similarly define crystalline alternate locations somewhere in the Canadian Shield, which is also all repeated information from 2011 and 2013, based on a number of character-defining features. They went on, having selected those character-defining features for each sedimentary and crystalline location, to then evaluate VECs based on these criteria of ability to prepare the site, the comparative cost and difficulty of construction, transportation issues, waste management, et cetera, et cetera. So this analysis that we saw similarly in the EIS, their approach to analysis, which is very juvenile, we all agree. They put the criteria for evaluation on one side, and then the various VEC qualities on the right side, and indicated in a very short form way how the at the crystalline or sedimentary locations, the various VECs would be affected by aspects of work at a DGR. They make a very bold statement, which continues on throughout the document. They are making the assumption that the proximity to water is not relevant in any of their examination because, as they have put forward, the movement of water or gas, even if it was released from the DGR, would not reach a water body. We heard that before in 2013 and 14, and they continue to repeat this ridiculous assertion. Their environmental effects summary is shown in their section 5.5, and they do conclude that environmental effects are likely to be greater at both sedimentary and crystalline alternate locations as compared to the DGR. They're building, this was their introduction, and this is their conclusion. They say the increased environmental effects on these alternate sites would include effects on air quality, increased GHG emissions, mainly due to transportation, increased effects on noise, because the locations that they've chosen on alternates that would be chosen alternatively would be quiet sites, and therefore the noise would be louder. I kid you not. And they also say that there are adverse effects on vegetation communities, including clearing, that are not going to be present on the Bruce site. They go on to talk about effects on wildlife communities, traditional and non-traditional land use, worker exposure during waste transportation, increase at the alternative site option, and the establishment of new sources of radiation exposure, because of course if you choose another site and you get off the Bruce site and there's no cumulative effect of the addition of radiation in the exposure at the Bruce site, you're setting up a new site for nuclear radiation exposure, and that's their argument. So I'm going to switch to something which is very significantly focused on in the report, which has to do with packaging and transportation costs and incremental risk. So OPG says that there's an increased probability for vehicle accidents during transportation at alternate sites, and there are increased radiological risks. And then they go on to tell us why. The transportation risks include taking the material to the alternate location and including how many waste packages that would include. And they conclude that there is a small but incremental risk of radioactivity to both the public and workers at the new sites. They do, though, say that the risks are manageable, and that whatever decision is chosen, it can be done safely. I want to switch to the cost impact, because this is a very big factor for them. They're saying that it's going to cost so much more money to do the DGR at an alternate site, that it should not be considered. And this is one of the pillars of their arguments. They say that the cost of an alternate sedimentary location over and above their base cost, which is $2.4 billion for the DGR at Kincardine, would be $1.2 billion more at minimum, that's to sedimentary, and that at an alternate granitic location, it would add up to $3.5 billion to the cost. So now I want to talk very briefly, I hope I'm okay, Bernane, in terms of time, about the $1 billion base cost. We're very familiar, all of us, with the fact that in 2016, up until 2016, everyone was claiming that the DGR in Kincardine would cost $1 billion. Now we hear that it's $2.4 billion, including all costs from 2004 to the end of the project. Their logic is that if the project is $2.4 billion, that adding $1.2 billion for transportation, or up to $3.5 billion, would be an excessive amount of cost increase. However, we can prove as a group that the $2.4 billion cost that they're claiming is not accurate. Therefore, the ratio of transportation costs off the site is very different than what they are representing. We have not gained access to OPG's cost estimates because they will not release them. The basic flaws in their incremental cost comparison is that there is no accurate cost for the DGR1 in Kincardine. Therefore, there is no accurate comparator for them. And in cost and risk analysis, this is a very important starting point for any argument that has to do with cost. So they also have no specific location to create the cost of construction. So their cost is baseless. The cost information that they're using is both inaccurate as well as outdated and ill-informed. They also have no accurate projection of what the waste should be that would leave the site. They have categorized the waste in terms of shipments, saying that 66% of the waste that is going to be shipped, that's the waste shipments, are actually low-level waste. So that would mean that only 33% of the shipments really need to go off the site if they were to come up with enhanced storage. They use the examples of Korea and Finland and Sweden to confirm that they should be keeping the waste together, but in fact the waste is not kept together at those locations. They also have not used current data that is easily available on the internet from NWMO and the Department of Energy in the United States to do with the cost of DGRs. They don't represent the criteria for assessment. They don't factor in the fact that this site would all likely be on Crown land there and not having to be purchased. And they don't factor in the fact that existing roads and infrastructure do exist in Southern Ontario and Northern Ontario. Just to briefly go through the chronology that builds up to this cost for $1 billion, we know from the Golder report in 2004 that Golder actually said that the cost of the DGR was going to be $478 million. However, just a month later, Glenn Sutton, Mayor of Kincardine, who was a signatory to the IAS, said that it was going to be $1 billion. Terry Squires of OPG said it was going to be $1 billion a couple of months later, and Marie Wilson later, that in October, said it was going to be between $864 and $1 billion. The Golder estimate of 2011 in the EIS said it was $1 billion, and then we hear the JRP repeated the $1 billion figure, saying that it was likely accurate in their report of May 2015. Fred Kuntz on November 11th, 2017 told us at a meeting that Bernane and a number of other people on the call attended that said that it was going to be $1 billion. Our conclusion is that the $1 billion is totally unrealistic and not transparent, not fiscally responsible, and is no basis for comparison with anything else off-site. The NWMO has indicated in a very detailed cost estimate issued in April that the crystalline base case for high-level waste is $18 billion, and that it could go up to $28 billion. So a $2 billion DGR is right off the map in terms of being representative of construction and operating costs, even for low and intermediate level waste. Research at the same time that's going on to evaluate methods of storage and waste separation by the Department of Energy in the United States indicates that a crystalline DGR would cost anywhere between $47 and $63 billion, and a sedimentary would be anywhere between $25 and $33 billion. This is US dollars in 2015 dollars. In the final chart that OPG never filled out, you see the VECs and the environmental components that are being investigated. I created this chart because they didn't, and we see that we don't have any real conclusions. Their study findings in the end said that the more environmental effects would occur at alternate locations for the reasons we've talked about, and there could be mitigation measures put forward, but there would be with no significant adverse effects expected. With transportation, the Bruce site still remains the preferred location. And that's the end of that part of my my presentation. Thank you. Bernine, you wanted me to speak to the Gandalf Bowl at the end.
That's right. So if you would stop sharing screen and make me host.
Did that work?
Not yet.
Okay. There we go. I think I did it.
All right. So I will begin sharing screen. So thank you, Jill. That was excellent. That was a very comprehensive review. And given the level of detail that Jill was able to share with us and the time we want to have left for discussion, I'm going to go very quickly. I've got just a couple of slides also on alternate locations. As Jill mentioned, their alternate locations that OPG provided were actually geologic regions, fairly large geologic regions. They did provide in their report a couple of tables for sedimentary locations and crystalline rock formations, and I took those coordinates. There's for the crystalline, they are in the found in the errata that was issued sometime after their December 28th filing. And I just mapped them out really very simply using Google Maps to show that the locations that they identified really are sort of they line up mostly around the very perimeter of the province. We do have Dr. George Reeves, who's actually on the webinar with us, has just provided us with a draft report. He is doing an evaluation of OPG's materials filed on alternate locations. And I haven't seen his draft report, but I'll just risk summarizing that his observation are like my observation and Jill's observation, that they haven't provided alternate locations. They have provided very generic, very general descriptions of two geologic regions. Dr. Reeves has emphasized the limitations of OPG's study of the first site of their candidate, their proposed site at Bruce, where they have only 6 boreholes to define and describe the site. In contrast, for the alternate locations, they have no boreholes because they didn't actually put any alternate locations forward. They also provided, as Jill noted, some criteria. They were told to provide technical and economic criteria for evaluating the alternate locations. And I have on the screen their table version of those. And I think the message from OPG is, in terms of the technical criteria, any rock will do. In terms of the economic criteria, any cost is fine. OPG argues that they can finance at any price through their own resources, or they can secure financing. And we know when OPG secures financing, it is the ratepayers pay first and the taxpayers pay second, because ultimately we bear those costs. So an interesting set of non-thresholds provided by OPG on those two important criteria that they were directed to outline. We also have Dr. Fred Dilger is doing an evaluation of the transportation and packaging section of the OPG response. And we received a draft report from Dr. Dilger yesterday evening. And I'll just summarize some of his key points. He says the review of this report concludes that the methods used do not conform to best practices for the transportation risk assessment of radioactive materials. The OPG report uses a very generic methodology to assess risk and cost. The report does not provide any specifics regarding route, unique local conditions, response preparation, coordination with local communities. And I think in summary, the report does not provide a meaningful response to the minister's request. I found it interesting that this is the first of the OPG reports where we have found OPG actually acknowledges risk and environmental burden from transporting of radioactive waste. For decades, they have been transporting these same wastes from Pickering and Darlington to the Bruce site. Even in the new build review, when they were proposing to build 4 additional reactors at Darlington, which would result in decades more of additional transportation, there was never from OPG any acknowledgement, even any analysis of the risk or impacts of transportation. So we finally have it as they argue against themselves. So with that, I'm going to hand over to John Jackson for an evaluation of cumulative effects. John, I'm going to make you the host. I do want to change, and I want to stop my screen sharing. John, over to you.
Okay, I think it's there.
You've got it.
Okay, first just a quick definition of environmental cumulative effects. And really what we're talking about that are changes to the environment as a result of projects in additional to the one that is being proposed. And that means things that are already in the community or in the area that could be affected, things that could happen in the future and be planned for the future, so that we have a true long-term perspective on what the effect in combination with everything else going on in the community of adding this to it could be. A major critique that many of us made at the hearings in 2013 and 14 was that this analysis was incredibly limited and incredibly flawed. And one of the things that we said they had to add to it was the possibility that the NWMO's facility for nuclear fuel bundles could be in the same area. So the minister, in her second question, said that they needed to add to their cumulative effects analysis the effect that nuclear waste management organizations facility would have if it were in one of those communities near the DGR site. OPG comes up with a very clear answer, as they would say, And it is, their conclusion is, since there are no adverse cumulative effects were identified for the OPG site with the NWMO site, they don't even have to assess the significance of cumulative effects. We don't need to do that because there can't be any, because there are no adverse effects. And that's end of discussion. Well, let's look at this. And a fundamental flaw in the way in which they are dealing at OPG with cumulative effects is they look at each effect individually and say that's not an important effect, or it's no effect, and then they just put in a big zero, and as they keep adding up the zeros, they end up with a zero. Where a true cumulative effects assessment says, even though the residual effects from individual items, individual concerns may not be significant, you could add two significant residual effects and add up with a significant cumulative effect. And because the entire cumulative effects assessment by OPG is built on something that is totally contrary to that fundamental concept of what cumulative effects means, that insignificant when combined with other things can become significant, it completely fails to answer the minister's question and means the entire assessment is seriously flawed. So what they spend their whole time doing is getting to justifying zero, the no's, so that they can end up not having to do an assessment, really. And we originally know the huge flaws that were in the cumulative effects assessment to begin with, and those were not to be addressed in this. The minister was simply saying to add the one item. So where they begin is by going to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, quite appropriately, and saying, okay, we need to have a description from you of your proposed DGR. Basically what it would be like, so we can figure out the impacts it might have, so that we can add you to the cumulative effects assessment. And NWMO quite rightly says, because they're only in a very preliminary stage, I mean, it's over a decade before have a site, before they start getting into more details, they quite rightly say throughout, in fact, they title their report Conceptual Design Description. And they repeatedly use that word conceptual throughout their report. They use phrases like preliminary, what is known or reasonably expected at this time. I think someone is making lunch, and if they could please stop it. It's a lot of pots I'm hearing running around. They use phrases like preliminary, what is known or reasonably expected at this time, and you know, make it very clear there's nothing definitive in this report, and that's to NWMO's credit. They're not claiming anything that they don't have, and why would they have it at this stage? And the report is only 31 pages long. They end by saying, making no conclusion on effects, the NWMO, and yet the OPG proceeds to use that report to justify the conclusion that there are no cumulative effects. So what they do, again making it easier for them to get to no effects, is they only look for the effect that you could have from the BGR site if there was, you know, their residual adverse effect at the OPG site. And because this is their idea that all you have to look at are things that are the same at both, which is just a fundamental flaw. The Joint Review Panel hired, as you all know, Dwunker, an expert, and I probably said his name wrong, to do a review for them of the cumulative effects assessment. And his comments were devastating. He used phrases like not credible, not defensible, inappropriate. And a major reason that he gave for that was this limitation that the OPG had, that things had to be overlapping. And this analysis in this report comparing on WMO is again, that is overlapping. Construction times, are they overlapping with each other? Are the times in which you're filling it overlapping with each other? Space, are they overlapping in space? And are they identical types of problems? Instead of recognizing that different types of problems could accumulate to make something much more serious. So that's another part of their fundamental flaws, but it's their way of clearly pushing to be able to get to this conclusion of no. The other thing that is really astonishing throughout is they'll do their assessments of particular types of impacts, be it noise issues or the loss of trees or whatever, and they'll come to phrases like unlikely, not likely, and then they'll suddenly turn those into no's instead of leaving them as unlikely means there is some possibility. And they just very quickly turn those sorts of things into definitive no's. The other thing is that they restrict very much the geography and the geographic overlap, so that very few things overlap between the NWMO site and what the DGR site of OPG could be. And a prime example of that is transportation. The only area that they refer to when they talk about it, and they talk about the noise issue, is Bay du Doré, which is right at the site. What about, I was born and raised in Harrison, Highway 9. And I remember as a kid, us watching the big entertainment, was watching the huge pieces of equipment being brought up Highway 9 through Harrison, Clifford, Mildmay, and then over to the Bruce site for the major construction. And you still see materials going through there. Well, that Highway 9 actually goes right through one of the proposed sites that NWMO is looking at, South Bruce. So the people that are below South Bruce on Highway 9 would be subject to transportation of materials to the sites, both sites, construction materials, radioactive waste, high level and the various levels, to both sites going up Highway 9 if that site were chosen. And so that is a cumulative effect that those people would be experiencing along the transportation route. But they very narrowly define who we have to be caring about in terms of cumulative effects. And again, they limit the transportation only to noise. They don't talk about pollution, emissions, or the possibility of accidents. The other thing is that if something, as I said before, is considered not significant, that's the end of the story, and you just remove it, and you can't have a problem. And both the United States Environmental Protection Agency, for example, and the Government of Canada are very clear, and I'll use the quote here from Environment Canada. Incremental effects may be significant, even though the effects of each action, when independently assessed, are considered insignificant. And that is the whole fundamental point of a cumulative effects assessment. And by turning everything into zeros and therefore deleting them from the possibility of having a cumulative effect, OPG just sets it up so that you can't possibly come up with a cumulative effect. So in conclusion, the OPG's conclusion, since no adverse cumulative effects are identified, an assessment of significance of cumulative effects is not required. Again, it has been set up. And by falsely getting to know, OPG avoids any discussion of significance. They also fail totally to use a precautionary approach. When you switch everything to no, you are taking away the complete absence of detailed information to support them getting to the situation of saying it doesn't have an adverse effect, because it's on such a weak foundation, especially when you're adding the NWMO to it as their site as a potential site, which the NWMO says right out is very limited information, to then leap from that to be able to come and say no cumulative effects is completely to avoid precaution. And precaution is ever so important, especially when we're talking about something of the nature and the detail of hazard that we have with the type of waste that we're talking about here. So the NWMO, the OPG has failed to give the minister a valid answer to her question 2. And the devastating effect of that is that it means that the public and government decision makers don't have the basis for having the real discussion that's needed to decide what type of effects this may have in combination with other things in the long term. We don't have the basis to have a real community discussion of that. And the decision maker, the minister and other decision makers are also in the position of not being able to have that discussion of what do we consider acceptable? What does the minister consider acceptable? Instead, OPG tries to take that question of acceptability off the table by saying there's no effect. There's nothing to discuss in terms of acceptability. So it really feels like a put-up job as you read it, and it's based on such flimsy information that it just has no basis. So that's my my presentation on cumulative effects, and I'll turn it back to you, Bernane. Let me just
Thank you, John. That was excellent. So
just get you switched over.
And
It's coming to you.
all right.
You see it? And now I need to turn off
Now
my.
you need to stop your view. Very good.
Is it gone? Oh, I see it now. Stop share.
There we go. All right. And then I will begin to share. So thank you, John. That was an excellent presentation. I'm going to speak very briefly to mitigating measures. This was the third part of the minister's request. And what OPG has done. Now, part of the first difficulty is that the minister's request was limited to terms to mitigating measures related to the Canadian Environmental Assessment approval. So you'll recall, for those who were part of the hearing stages of this review, we had two sets of applications. There's the Canadian Environmental, there's the application for environmental assessment approval under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, but OPG at the same time filed their application for the license to prepare a site and license to construct the site. They combined those two applications. So many of the real technical uncertainties are associated with the license application, or have through a agreement among OPG, Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and the Joint Review Panel. Those issues have been assigned to the licensing application. So that's the first frustration. The second frustration is that OPG has taken the list of mitigating and monitoring commitment, and they have regrouped them. So I think that we have not yet done the full tracking through of those, and I think our review will be in part comment on the limitations when you create this distinction between the license application and the environmental assessment application, and partly commenting on particularly paying attention to those in the category that OPG says are outdated or already completed. So with that, I'm going to take just one moment before I pass over control to Jill, and I am going to mute somebody who has been so 941-567-0467. You will have to send a chat message, I think, to be unmuted. And that will improve our sound quality. You may be able to unmute on your end. For those who are joined by computer, if you look on your lower right screen, you should see an icon that will allow you to mute or unmute your mic. So Jill, I'm just about to make you the host. Over to you, Jill.
Thank you. I think I'm the host now. I'm wondering if people can see my screen.
No, you have to share a screen again.
All right, and I'll figure out how to do that. That is, and if you could tell me when.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Okay, Jill has started screen sharing. You're good to go, Jill.
Am I? You can see a full screen. Okay. All right, so my title in the previous slide with the amusing typo is that, you know, what's happening now before March the 6th. And I know that there are a great number of people who are preparing papers, reports through their own efforts and through experts to respond to the decision. And maybe, Bernane, you could guide us at the end of this. But I did want to talk about the issue of social license, which is Section 7 of the OPG report. I encourage you to read this because if you haven't thought about putting in anything to the minister based on all you've heard to date, reading this will make you run to the typewriter and start writing to the minister. OPG has said that they have the social license to proceed with this project because they have a supportive and welcoming host. They have built public trust. They have been in this business for a long time. They have fostered positive and mutually beneficial relationships with Indigenous communities, and they have the well-being of the public at heart and are well regarded by the public. I won't read through this, but it's just hair-raising. They do say that the municipality of Kincardine has bought into this, that they are an informed host community, that their local government is active and participatory, that support has been reiterated through numerous municipal resolutions at council. They say up to June 2015, but as Marty knows, in Kincardine, February 2017, Kincardine passed another resolution, and that they also see that to find a new location for the DGR could take decades, which would cost money and time. I want to point out that you should look at the report that was done by the Gandalf Group of Toronto, where they were hired by OPG to come to an understanding of what Ontarians really felt about the DGR. The Gandalf Group interviewed by telephone 850 people scattered throughout the province, and based on their initial understanding, they felt that the province of Ontario, the majority of people had heard about the project and they were supportive of it. SOS has taken quite a bit of time and will release by press release very soon in the next couple of days their report, which used the skills of people who are very involved in analyzing polls at a professional level to find out what no one is surprised at, that the poll did not meet the standard sampling, question formulation, or application methodology, and that the reporting in the Gandalf poll was highly irregular. Most questions were loaded, and the sampling of people across Ontario, many of them had not heard about the DGR, so they were really not good participants to involve in this poll. If the study is to be believed at all, there is one thing that comes out of it that was not made much of by OPG, and that is that Ontarians in the majority feel that the DGR poses a threat to public drinking water and to the health of the lake. And there's much more to come on this, but it's absolutely, we have to be defiant on these half-truths, alternate truths, and fiction that is being perpetrated even down to the new Gandalf poll. So that's what I have to say on that. And Bernay, perhaps you wanted me to say something else, but I'm not sure what that would be. Thank you. Bernay?
Yep, thank you, Jill. That's great. If you want to return me as host and stop screen sharing, and we'll just finish up. I do want to thank everyone for their patience as we go through a longer than usual presentation. We did see the timeline earlier in the presentation, so I'll just remind people that we have until March 6th to make comments, and those comments are to be directed to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, although of course we would encourage you always to copy those comments to the Minister of the Environment and also to other elected officials in at both the provincial and federal level, and also your municipalities if that seems appropriate. So we're going to open the I'm going to open the session for discussion now, and then we'll have a look at next steps. There we have them up on the screen. We have a March 6th deadline for comment, then SIA will prepare a report, then the public will comment on draft reports and conditions. That'll probably be summertime. SIA will finalize their report, and they'll pass that on, what they call a decision package, to the minister in the fall of 2017. So it's phase 5, but we're far from finished. Maybe we'll just move forward and just look at, just take a look at next steps, or some actions people can take, just as a final note of encouragement. Of course, we have our March 6th deadline, and you are encouraged to submit your comments to SIA, but also to write to the minister and urge her to reject OPG's proposed DGR. This is, strike 4. So specifically on the alternate locations, they didn't meet the guidelines direction in their 2011 EIS. They didn't provide information on alternate locations in response to information requests from the panel in 2013. They failed in providing their independent expert report in the extended hearing in 2014 to address this. And now, strike 4, they haven't provided the information on alternate locations in response to the minister's request for additional information. So the minister is very much within her rights to simply reject OPG's proposed deep geologic repository on the basis of their having failed to meet the basic requirements of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. You're right, tell her that. Send a copy of your letter to members of the federal cabinet and to members of parliament in Ontario in particular. Also copy the Premier and ministers, members of cabinet and the provincial legislature. Call the minister's office and cabinet office, send a letter and make a call, and it doubles the value of both of those actions. And share information through your networks, through social media, write letters to the editor, hold events to draw attention to this. I think that there are a number of us who could do short presentations by Skype, or this system, the Zoom system, is available. Hold a local meeting and draw more attention to the March 6th deadline and everything that we're going to have to do and follow up to that. And of course, sign on to petitions, joint letters, and encourage others to do the same. There's lots of sources of information available. On the left is the nuclearwaste.ca, which is sort of a non-website. It's a switchboard website. It's simply an easy to remember address, nuclearwaste.ca. And from there you can link to, across the top, the 4 major sites about nuclear waste. The one farthest right is about Bruce Nuclear Waste burial itself, but also there are links to SELA, SOS, Great Lakes, and so on from that page. The middle site is brucenuclearwasteburial.ca, which has the links to the minister's request for additional information and OPG's additional information. It also has links on the links page to the email addresses, contact information for the federal cabinet in Canada, and sosgreatlakes.org. And of course, the CEA agency, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency public registry website, which has the postings on it and the whole history of documents for this.